We're going to get to audience questions here in just a second. I want to be very timely, make sure you get out of here on time, but I'm going to start with just a few questions. Dean Scheffel, one of the challenges we face in Colorado is the need to get teachers out to rural communities. CCU received a grant to be able to help with that, but what are your solutions? You sit on the State Board of Education. What are you all working towards to get teachers out to those rural communities?
Well, there are some good programs where higher education partners with school districts to create incentives for teachers to move into rural districts. There are some real issues, particularly in shortage areas like special education, science, math, for rural districts to be able to hire well-prepared teachers and to keep them. The retention issue is a big issue too. It's great when teachers can stay several years and get a sense of the district and the culture and really be successful as students. So I think some of those partnerships between higher education and districts in rural areas can be really effective for incentivizing teachers to teach in rural areas.
Derek, question for you. I heard this at the Douglas County School Board meeting one time. Charters draw out students from neighborhood schools and engage parents. And in many ways, you end up losing some of the most engaged parents because they want a particular type of curriculum or values shared with their children, so they choose charter schools. So that leaves these neighborhood schools to be empty, to have the more active parents are now moved out, and so the system starts to unravel itself. How do you respond to that criticism of charter schools?
It's a good question. I think you touched on this a little bit yourself, and we've heard a little bit from Dr. Scheffel as well. So if you look across the state, there are waiting lists on charter schools. Parents want more options. They want more choice for their kids. And again, that's not always an indictment that the school district or the government-run schools are bad. It's just that parents want more choices. I know, as an example, our schools, we offer direct instruction. We have kids sitting in rows and desks, teachers in front of the room. Kids sit, they wear uniforms. It's a very formal, traditional school environment. That's contrasted to a lot of classrooms you'll see today where kids sit in groups with pods, and the teacher floats around the room, and kids are expected to learn from each other and somehow to spontaneously become educated. Simplification. But parents want different options. And I think when we hear school boards step in and say they know what's best for families, families don't really know what's best for their kids. Let us be the ones to tell you. That's really disappointing. We hear we don't need more charters. We need, because they're pulling the best kids out. So let's shut down the competition. It's rare that you hear enough self-awareness and introspection where a school district will say, okay, parents are leaving. When offered more choice, parents want something else. How can we respond to that and offer what parents want? How can we do a better job in our schools? That's not the conversation that typically takes place. Instead, it's, as Mike said, shut down your competition, which is why I'm a huge proponent of we need to change the framework to disempower school boards to allow more competition for charter schools to be able to partner with good partners.
Right. Mike.
Jeff,
go ahead.
Before you put a question to me, can I just pile on
Sure.
with an answer to that question? You remember when the Berlin Wall came down? A lot of people left East Germany for someplace else.
Go the other way.
Sears, which was a giant in retailing for 100 years, Sears is about to go bankrupt because the customers didn't want it anymore.
Right.
There will nonetheless, take Boulder Valley School District. Boulder is a very left-wing progressive place. The parents who might want to take their kids out of that progressive environment so that rather than have their kids conditioned to become social justice warriors, perhaps they'd rather send them to a place where they'd learn something about economics and capitalism and become entrepreneurs. But there will always be a huge demand in this blue state, we're not red anymore, for schools that teach progressive values, so they're not going to disappear. Some parents just want to be able to escape that and go to something else. One size doesn't fit all.
Right.
You wanted to ask me something.
Right. Well, I'm going to pivot just a second. I'm going to play a little bit of a devil's advocate here. So we talk about different schools. We want to have maybe conservative, classical, trained schools. We want to have progressive schools. But Laura brought up the point that we need to have a common culture. So how do you still develop a common American culture when you have schools that provide very different values?
That's a great question. And Laura talked about the melting pot, where people would come from other countries and assimilate. The parents got here and couldn't speak English, but the second generation could speak English. Mm-hmm. And they assimilated to learn and embrace and admire American values. That's why people are leaving Mexico to come to the United States. And isn't it ironic? Some of those people who couldn't get out of Mexico fast enough, not all of them, but the more radical elements, now they wave Mexican flags at anti-American demonstrations. That always puzzles me. A common culture, I think it's unachievable right now because of the great public divide, what Jonah Goldberg calls tribalism, factionalism, identity politics. Mm-hmm. And to have a common educational approach in this day and age, given the politics of this state, for example, it would be on the progressives' terms. That's why they don't want to let us escape and go to schools where the kids will have their parents' values endorsed and reinforced as opposed to challenged and disrespected. So your question implies that we can have a common culture, one that those of us in this room would prefer. We can't, because the other side controls public education and controls higher education as well, and controls Hollywood and television and social media.
All right. Laura, do you want to answer that same question?
Well, I guess I'm a little bit more optimistic. So I wish Krista were here. While I don't disagree, I do have lots of room in my head and heart for optimism because you're all here. If we had come tonight and there were 5 people in this audience and there were 4 of us on the stage, I might be a little bit more pessimistic. But there are only a couple secrets you need to know. Secret number 1, go be on a school accountability committee. Jeff mentioned PTA. Fine, lovely organization. But do you know where curriculum decisions are made? It's on the accountability committee. Do you know we have a state law in Colorado that says there needs to be somebody on the accountability committee who's not connected to the school? Raise your hand if you don't currently have a kiddo in a public school. You all, right there, hands up, go get on an accountability committee.
She just volunteered, Jill.
Thank you. Find your closest school. So I guess I'm a little bit more optimistic because parent-run schools can be government-run district schools if you all are on the accountability committees, if you all are running for school boards, if you all are voting for school board members that you want to run these government-run schools. We know it can work. We know it's an uphill battle. But I am more optimistic than my friend, Mr. Rosen, because you all are here. And I trust that you're going to walk out of here tonight doing something about this.
Right. Deb?
Just to follow up on that, I would say teaching the truths of our history to the next generation from original sources goes a long way to helping us get on the same page as far as our values of freedom and virtue. And I would say that parents and our society needs to demand that. I would also say that there's a recent research article that was encouraging in that using distance, number of competitors, and types of options in terms of schools, those 3 variables and how close they are to a traditional public school results in increased achievement in all the schools, including the traditional public schools. So I think that just the specter of competition and options causes schools to be more responsive to the public and what it wants. And one of those central things needs to be that our students are taught the truths of our history from original sources so that we can understand our past and how we got to where we are.
Great. All right, at this point, we're going to turn it over to questions. Now, it's important that you don't start your question until you've been handed a microphone from either Ethan or Mira. Because we have people watching online and they won't be able to hear you. So if you have a question, raise your hand. We'll start with this gentleman in the blue right there. Mira's going to give you the microphone.
Thank you very much. And I'm a public school teacher and a homeschool dad, so I have a very unique look at education. And this is my 21st year in the classroom. So Dr. Shuffle, I would love a job from you someday. And Derek, I would love a job from you someday to get out of the public schools and do something different. And I agree with everything that's been said. Public school, it's a tough place to teach. It's a tough place for our students. But I wanted to echo what Mrs. Boggs said, is that the enemy is not the public school. The enemy is still the enemy. And I think that we need to pray for our public schools. And I think we need to remember our public schools. Because our children, our grandchildren are going to come alongside these peers. And they're going to work with them. And they're going to interact with them. And they're going to marry them. Okay? And so we need to still pray for our public schools, and we still need to remember them. We need to come alongside our public school teachers and encourage them, because there are conservative teachers in the public schools. I'm one, and we
There's another one.
yeah, there's several, right? So that would be my encouragement, is just to, like Mrs. Boggs said, is to get involved and to come alongside the public school. You've listed a lot of great things about things that are ills and things that are wrong with public schools. So I guess my fear is, as a public school or as a homeschool dad, is if we are asking for and wanting government funding to come into parochial schools and vouchers, aren't we also asking for the government to, isn't it an inroad for the government? And if we turn our parochial schools to the government and our homeschool to the government, aren't we just inviting these same kind of ills into our homes, into our school, our private schools?
Mike, you want to take that?
Yeah. If we did have a voucher system, no school would be required to take those dollars. And if a given school didn't like the terms that government was imposing, then that school would say, I'm sorry, we're not going to take your money, or don't apologize for it. We're going to maintain what we've been doing and still offer that alternative. How many people here voted for Jared Polis for governor? No. Okay, that's all right. The rest of you in this state are now in the minority. How many here wanted a Democrat majority in both houses of the state legislature? We're in the minority. Laura, when you and your conservative school board at Jeffco had those 2 wonderful years of Camelot, and then the teachers
Wasn't
union,
all that Camelot.
not only the local teachers union, but the National Education Association gathered together an army to come in and defeat you in the next election, and they won. What I'm saying is, I'm not going to predict the future 10 and 20 years from now, but right now we're in the minority, and we're going to be educated on the terms of the majority. And as you said, we're a republic that respects the rights and independence and individuality of the minority. And the only way we're going to get that, something like what we want in education, is by going outside of the system that is run by a majority that fundamentally disagrees with us and calls us deplorables. Charters and vouchers even better than charters. I love charters too, but charters are still part of the political structure of a school district. Vouchers are independent of that. Now, we've got some great charter schools here in spite of that. And this question about taking government money, you're taking government money in your charter school, but you've maintained your independence, haven't you? So while I'm not as optimistic as Laura, I'm not paranoid either. And this one argument about, no, let's not have vouchers because they might be controlled by government, I'll take my chances on that.
So I want to jump in real quick, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Just 2 quick points. One is Canada has had vouchers for, I think, 2 centuries. And while certainly it is true that government tests and make sure that when you take public money that there's some level of quality happening there. I think that we need to look to our neighbors to the north for what that might look like and how the government's involved. Second, thank you for your service. And I was reading Daniel this morning. I think we're common cultured enough in this room that you all know what that means. I was reading Daniel this morning, and we do need to pray for public education. We still, in the United States of America, have the freedom to pray openly and always. And Daniel reminded me of the power of our God and the miracles that can happen every single day. And that also gives me hope and optimism. Thank you for your service.
Right. Anil, back there. This will be a good question.
After the election, the Denver Teachers Union filed a CORA, an open records request, and got the names of addresses of all the charter school teachers and addresses. My wife went to public school in New York City. I went to public school in Philadelphia. They've tried charter schools, and they've been brutalized by the teachers union. It seems like here in Colorado, we don't want to fight. We got brutalized in Jefferson County with an awesome conservative board. We got brutalized in Douglas County. What will it take good people to rise up and stand up and fight? Because right now, you have to understand, our opponents are on a war path. What will it take good people to stand up? Because I'm the chairman of the Adams County Republican Party. And across the state, about 300,000 Republicans did not even vote. And this education is extremely important. I'm just asking the panel, what will it take people to stand up, because the apathy is killing us?
Question. Want to take that one?
Well, I guess, Anil, again, I'm a little bit more optimistic. I guess I don't really see them as enemies. I mean, my neighbor doesn't want bad things for their children either. Sometimes they're misguided. Sometimes they're lied to. But I think that I still believe that God has a purpose for that. And sometimes we forget that there are 6,000 new parents, or whatever the number is in your district every year, kindergarten parents who come in who don't know what happened last year or the year before or 5 years before that. So I'm optimistic that some folks in here will decide to run for school boards, and some folks in here will support other folks who are running for school boards. I don't see the same lack of excitement around education. I go back to, I don't think people know what to do, and I hope you all walk out of here tonight and commit to telling 3 of your neighbors that you're going to run for school board, or that they're going to run for school board, because I think you just have to do something. So I'm not quite as pessimistic.
Part of the question, part of the challenge that Neil was pointing out was, you've run for school board, you've been on school board, you've run for school board. They're not very nice to you when you run for school board. I mean, they're very intense, and they'll rip, they'll dig into your past. They'll find anything they can to stop you. And so it's one thing to get involved, but you also have to have the perseverance to fight and to recognize that you're fighting for a good, and that they're going to do their best to stop you in every capacity, but you've got to persevere. And both of you all have been in that limelight. And we saw some of our friends, John Newkirk and the rest of the school board here in Douglas County, just ripped to shreds during the last campaign. So, I mean, it is a battle. It really is out there.
So I appreciate that, Jeff. And to be honest, I had no idea. I mean, really, if we had been sitting here in 2009, in January of 2009, I'd been sitting in the audience, I would have been a mom, just like you guys, thinking that when over the summer my husband and I were fighting about who was going to run for the school board, and we kept pointing at each other, that it really was going to be like a super PTA, that my friend Kelly and I would still get along, and that we wouldn't tell lies about each other, and that, things were going to be just like PTAs were, and that's not what happened. Mm-hmm. But what I quickly discovered to my friend who's a teacher, for me anyway, I hit my knees very early in that process. And some great politician said, if you're not taking flack, you're not over the target. And I hit my knees, and God made it not feel like it was hard. He just made it feel like I was called to do it. It doesn't mean it was always fun with rooms filled with people like this who weren't very excited about the fact that I got to influence that. But I have to tell you, if we don't, we risk our republic. Are you willing to do that? Are you willing to let us be in a position where folks, 50% of our third graders don't read at grade level? That doesn't get fixed without 2 more years of excellent teachers who we aren't paying, with respect, enough to come out of college and go into public education. I have 2 very lovely, I think they're amazing because they're my children. And one of them's a PhD candidate at Michigan. He would not be a teacher for $34,000 a year. One of them's a business major at DU. She would not be a teacher for $34,000 a year. Do they make a lot of money over time and including para? Yes, I don't disagree with the average teacher salary, all compensation. But we're not paying them enough coming out of college to attract and retain our best and brightest. That has got to change.
It's more complicated than that. And I understand your good intentions. But Leon Trotsky once said, "You may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you." Analogous to that, you may not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you. And school policy in this state and in this country is all about politics. Milton Friedman talked about the concentrated versus the diffused interest. I bet a number of you are familiar with that concept. Laura is a victim of the concentrated interest, and the concentrated interest was the teachers' union. The victory for one bright shining hour or 2 years in Jeffco was an existential threat to teacher unions all over the country. And that's why the National Education Association mobilized to drive the demons out of the Jefferson County School Board. And they did. They've got the money, they've got the organization, and all of us in this room are individuals. Now, sure, I've been fighting all my life for this kind of stuff, and I do it in a different venue. I do it in the media. I may be in the media, but I'm not of the media. Media is also dominated by liberals. The deck is stacked against us. That's okay, it's always been stacked against us, and I've never given up. But let's not delude ourselves about the power of the enemy. And they are the enemy. That teachers union hates competition. They want to protect their monopoly. Just like any institution that benefits from monopoly wants to do. It's no surprise that a majority of millennials think socialism is better than capitalism. This is the immense value of controlling public education, brainwashing the next generation. And they've been successful. In the interim, before some tidal wave changes the majority in Colorado from blue to red, in the meantime, the best avenue we have is getting out of that monopoly's control with school choice, doing everything we can to promote school choice. And from a partisan standpoint, Republicans need to capitalize on that, because blacks and Hispanics are much more supportive of school choice than whites are. Let's deliver that message to them.
Great, great. We're going to ask one more question, and then I want you all to be thinking the most important public policy priority to improve government-run education. It doesn't have to be a public policy itself. It could be more parental involvement and getting involved, but I want you to be thinking about that, and then we'll go down the line and get that so everyone has at least one thing to take away from each one of you. We'll do one more question here. There's a lady over here. Hold on real quick. They got to get you the microphone. Hold on, folks. They can't hear you all the way in.
Hi, my name is Sue Johnson, and it's good to see Anil here. I'm the only Republican in Boulder Valley School District, so not really, but very few. And I'm actually. My students know me as the House District 6 captain for Republicans in Denver, so that's okay. What I guess that my question is, accidentally started teaching after 9/11. I'm a software engineer. I have a master's in math, computer science, and all that jazz. And so I wanted to teach math until Common Core came along, and this is complete nonsense. But I built a real big computer science program there. And so what I see is this. I'm literally the only conservative, and I know what you're saying, I do, and right now we're fighting mindfulness training, which is not religious, but it's Buddhist and Hindu, and on and on. I just got a flyer tonight for culturally responsive teaching, whatever that means. So, and these are just fads. So I think that what you're talking about, and I know I've talked to Laura quite a bit when she was running her campaigns. These are just fads, but what Mike Resin says, it's the teacher union. And so I guess that what I've been conflicted about, do we just give up and leave the school system? I really respect people that stay in it. It's so hard. I'm the only conservative in that school. And I've been, threatened with, are you racist? I'm like, what? Just kind of crazy stuff. And so it's definitely, as a conservative, we're supposed to leave and go find another school, to teach in. It's a conundrum. So that's what I would like some comments on.
Yeah. And Deb, I think you would be really poised to answer this. You not only serve on the State Board of Education, but you're charged here at CCU to produce the next generation of teachers. And you're not just sending them into private schools or parochial schools, you're equipping them to become great public school teachers. And that's an important aspect of this too. It's not just their faith and their values. They have to be competent and really quality teachers. So can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, most of our students actually that graduate in teacher preparation here at CCU go into traditional public schools. And I appreciate that because we need Christian teachers in the public education system to be an influence, and I ask them to go in with competence, with commitment and passion, and with love for children, and with great respect for parents and families. And so I think that we can have a huge influence on the culture just by sending well-prepared, godly teachers into the classroom. And that's what we're asked to do as citizens of the kingdom, to impact our culture for Christ. And so we want our teachers to be in whatever venue they want to be in, but many of them just go in to just traditional public schools.
Right.
And they
So
make a big difference.
So stay present.
Stay engaged.
Stay
And I
engaged.
always think of it in terms of macro, micro. When we look at the system on a macro level, there are many impediments, as this teacher referenced. Many tides of difficulty that make it hard for just great teachers to do great work every day, though most of them do anyway. But the system itself often does not support teachers the way it needs to. On a micro level, you go into many classrooms, I would say most, and you'll find great teachers doing wonderful work with your kids and grandkids. And that's the micro piece, and that's what our students, we want them to do. Go into classrooms, be competent, teach great skills and knowledge, link it to ultimate significance in life, and prepare the next generation to be great citizens of this nation. Our teachers are doing that, and our classrooms in Colorado are filled with teachers like that. The system itself is problematic for some of the values and the quality that we seek.
Right. Derek?
I think that's a great question. And again, back to my story, how I got involved in this is being a military veteran, somebody who's patriotic. I love our country. I love the background of our country and the philosophy of which we're built. My concern was I wasn't seeing a focus and appreciation for that. And the great thing about school choice in charter schools in Colorado is if parents have a good idea, if they want something different for their kids, we have a legal framework in the state where we can go out, put an idea together, and go build a school that does it. I think that's great. Again, my school, I was very selfish. I wanted one school for my kids because I wanted them to get an education. I wanted them to be able to think. I hate to say critically because I don't know any other way of how you think. It's all critical thinking. But I want them to be able to reason. I want them to just be raised and having a love and appreciation for the cultural heritage that we are a part of here in our country. I was kind of one and done, but the hearing from other parents that as we quickly had wait lists, well, how about my kid? And then started looking around, well, my kid's going to graduate. He's going to go and he's going to have peers who didn't have this type of education, as I believe as you mentioned. What's the tipping point here? How do we start having an influence? And my kids need to be able to go out in the world and have other kids who've had the experience that my kids have had. So for me, that's how I've been involved in creating more schools, like our classical schools, because more kids need this opportunity. They need this appreciation for us to continue as a free country. So my answer is get together and support an option. If you don't like what's going on in public education, do better. Get on board with something better.
Great. All right. We're going to go down. We'll start with Ms. Boggs. One thing that we can do to improve government-run education.
Know better. Learn what's actually happening. If you know, you'll share and you'll do.
So get involved. Know better. Great. Mr. Rosen.
I think we need to help people understand that there's a distinction between individual teachers and their union. I came up with an acronym, and let me apologize for what the acronym sounds like before and I've said it on the air and written it in columns. I call it cat piss. That's CATPS. How else would you pronounce it? And it stands for Chronic Adult Teacher Pet Syndrome. An example of which is your next door neighbor, who's a very lovely 23-year-old woman, graduated from a teacher's college. You just love her, but you don't understand, you do. A lot of people don't understand that her union has a different agenda than she does and than you do. I've talked to so many parents who've gotten involved by being a member of the parent-teacher organization or the PTA, whatever abbreviation they're using, who have gotten frustrated because those bodies are dominated by the cat piss types who don't want to rock the boat. They want to enlist these people in bakery drives and things like that and have them show up and support the status quo, but they're not going to take on the culture. I love so many individual teachers, but I don't love their union and its agenda, which extends well beyond school policy. It's into foreign policy, and they're against defense spending, and on and on and on. At their national convention, the NEA passes referenda on all these kinds of things that have nothing to do with public education. So the accountability committees you mentioned, they're dominated by the same crowd. You've seen the same thing with your academy, right? The accountability committee is even worse than the school board on opposing your charter.
Well, accountabilities are associated with the school, so we actually have a good one that's aligned with our mission.
Lucky you, okay.
I think he means the district DAX.
Yeah. Great. Derek?
So I have a laundry list of specific big policy things that need to take place in the legislature, but the question is, how do parents, how do people in this room get involved? So, again, if you're a hammer, everything's a nail. I think it's getting involved in supporting school choice. I think being involved in your government-run schools is important as well, but I think if people get engaged, help build and establish choices that are schools that are going to develop children who have the appreciation and virtue that you believe need to be present to move society forward or move us forward or preserve what we have here. Be involved, make that happen. I think once we get schools established that are great schools, not just any schools, I think that's how we have a long-term effect. I appreciate school boards. I think that's just a battle every 2 years and you're gaining and losing ground, but I think there is a permanence in being able to be involved in expanding school choice.
Right. Dean Sheffel.
Yeah, my thought would be it's just essential that if you're a parent or you know parents, that people remain engaged in what their kids are learning in school. Kids learn how to think about life and make decisions in school. They're very formative years. And so we need to know what our kids are reading, how they're learning to puzzle through issues. We need to be engaged as the adults to try to help figure out if that's consistent with our values or not, and we need to encourage folks to take advantage of the choices that are available in Colorado. The biggest problem I see is when parents don't like what's happening, but they're not engaged enough to know really where the leverage points are. We're a fairly choice-friendly state. We have open enrollment, we have charter schools, we have online schools, we have lots of options. And it's often the case that if a child's not thriving in one context, he or she can find another one in which they will thrive. And so it's essential that our kids are learning in a context that helps them fulfill their potential and where our values are being upheld as families and parents. So I would just encourage people to stay engaged and encourage folks that have kids to take advantage of the choices that are available so that we have a lot of competition in the system. All boats rise, including traditional public schools.
Great. Can we give our panelists a round of applause? Very helpful. Thank you.